Well, good day everyone. This is First Contact Gamer coming to you with a new type of content to the channel. I've been spending a lot of time in the recent years going deeper and deeper into the Hex Encounter board game hobby, and this is the very first video we are doing of that tabletop content. So right here what we're specifically playing is the Third Winter, which is a simulation of World War II, 1943 to 44 in the Ukrainian area of the Eastern Front, really simulating as the Soviets begin their counteroffensive through the fall, winter, and spring of those 2 years. And we're specifically playing the Manstein's Fire Brigades scenario, which is a shorter scenario, 9 turns I believe in total, utilizing just one of the 4 maps that the game does provide. What we're looking at here is actually a game that I've had in progress. This is turn 2 of the scenario, so it's not exactly as it is when set up brand new, and we're currently playing through the Soviets' turn. We're in the movement phase right now. I've actually already conducted movement south of this line of the 20th grid on the Hex map here. So all of these units down here, we have already completed their movement segment. We've also done movement segment to move and ferry around some of the transport points and supplies to get them in the right spots for the rest of the movement that we'll have. To recap what we had down here in this part of the front, and actually going to cut here as we zoom in so we can look at it more specifically. So what we have here is an advance as the Soviets have actually started to break through the lines on this portion of the advance. And for context, there's the city of Uman just to the south of this little pocket following this main road here. That is actually one of the victory conditions for the Soviets. The Axis forces, of course, have to try to hold it to win. Soviets have to take it. So it's a pretty important thoroughway for the Soviets to be breaking through, and frankly, they're having better success here than they are in other parts of the front. And this is where a lot of the supply points have been going and have been focused on. We're currently at a head. It's a little tough to see with the stacks of counters. But we're currently at a head where this minor river is the main defensive fortification that the Axis forces have, and the Soviets stopped here in their advance. You can see below this DG marker that we do have some Soviet armor there, and if we maybe just push away this stack so we can see what that looks like. You can see the river cutting through. This is the only spot where there is actually a road to go across the river. So of course, Soviets will face pretty hefty penalties to their attacking power crossing that river without a bridge. Even with a bridge, it's still going to be a difficult assault. But this is going to be the main point of concentration. So what the Soviets have started to do is actually move forces in the flanking maneuver around. Because this is currently in the winter, we do have a situation where it's a little easier to cross rivers. Now turn 1 actually begins in a weather determination of freeze, which makes it much easier to cross rivers. However, our weather turn for turn 2 here was dry. So hopeful that in turn 3 the Soviets might get a favorable weather determination back to freeze, which would then allow these forces to cross the river with much fewer restrictions on the movement points and begin a little bit of an encircling of this bridgehead that we have. We also have the 9th Motorized of the Axis forces sitting over here in this pocket, and again, they're looking to try to, at the very least, feint, if not actually successfully, move across the river here and to break out towards some of these other points. You can actually see that we have an air base here and some German headquarter units as well. Now we are using some of the unit formation markers to try to reduce on counter density, so there's actually significantly more units below this 9th motorized stack than what we're seeing here on the map itself. Those are sitting off map to just, again, try to manage the counter density a little better. I'm going to move these guys back to where they were so we don't forget about that. And again, this is just a little bit of a recap of what's already happened in turn 2. And we're going to start actually doing movement in the portions of the map that we have not yet conducted. A quick note, here we have these hedgehogs. This is the original status quo of the front from the beginning of the scenario. As the Soviet player, I've tried my best to actually completely ignore them and try to flank around them, which I think is the more logical choice. We're going to cut now as we move focus back over to, we'll call the middle portion of the front that is currently out of view, and we'll go through and execute those movement stages. So now that we're looking here in a little bit more of a center view of the front lines, let's go through the different movement actions that we want to do in turn 2 as the Soviet player. What's important, of course, in OCS is, as always, the supply that we have available to us. This southern advance has taken by far the majority of the supply that the Soviets have had available to them. And that's the reason that they've been successful as well, is we've really thrown everything we can to try to pressure that front down there as we try to march on to Uman. What that leaves us with in the center are really a terrible supply situation, as anything remaining mostly has gone to the north, which we'll cover in the next section here. We do have one supply point that is here under the 38th Corps headquarters, and we have another supply point that is sitting over here under the 2nd Tank Corps headquarters. Now, those supply points are for most of these units then within range, and the area of focus that I think we should spend time on in this movement phase is going to be the 6th Guard Tank Army. Now I am using the unit formation marker here to represent for counter density. I'm going to put here onto the map the units that are currently underneath that 6th Guard Tank Army, and we'll take a look at everything we have there currently ready to break out. Now, we do have these 3 armor units, which are quite a force within themselves. And we do have, behind the lines, a couple of leg-based unit infantry, which really, their great benefit here is that they don't require any supply points to move, whereas these motorized and truck and track related units that we see highlighted with the red and the black movement allowance values, those do require supply points to move. So what my thought is, if we spend supply on the 6th Guard tank formation, we may then be able to actually fuel all units within this formation by using the formation supply methodology, which would then fuel these 3 armor units plus this motorized infantry unit here. And that may then give us a chance to actually break out a little, and we could fill in the space in the line that we've had our breakout in with perhaps some of these regular infantry units. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to pretty much use the 6th Guard tank transport point here, and we're going to fetch this one supply point from this hex. We're going to spend it, and we're going to put the 6th Guard tank formation into supply. So we'll flip this marker now to represent that all units of that unit now are within supply. I think what we will also do is, this is actually a couple of units here that did not advance quite as far with the 6th Guard tank army, so they're part of the same formation. We're going to take these, they're currently on their movement side, and we're going to flip those over to their combat side, which reduces their movement allowance but increases their combat value. And I think we can use these fellows with, we'll remember, 6, 6, and 5 movement allowance to try to break through a little bit here. Next thing that we really need to consider is where do we want to go? Do we want to put pressure over here on these forces that are likely going to attempt to fall back, or at the very least relieve our breakout that we have in the north? Or do we actually continue this pressure on our southward push by trying to cut off avenues of resupply and reinforcements coming from the west, and really kind of an envelopment pincer movement where we're proceeding south through here, but then also south where we were looking earlier along that major throwaway. Frankly, I'm a little torn on the decision, but I think we're probably going to go with an advance and a breakout in this direction towards the north here. So let us begin first by taking these units here, and we're going to be maybe a little more conservative than we would otherwise, but I'm going to take these units, and effectively we'll say that these two move together up to here, this unit moved here. We're not going to conduct any combat with them because our supplies are so strained presently. And that moves those guys up. Now we're going to take the rest of the 6-guard tank formation, which is represented by this unit formation, and we're going to move them. And you see that really 8 is our lowest value in terms of movements. We could see what the value is on this guy, 3. Yeah, so I don't think we want to flip him over to a leg-based movement speed. I think we'd rather keep that 16 there. And when we're looking at some of the penalties to go through light woods, because that would be one possible route, we do see that for dry weather conditions in light woods, the movement cost for truck is 2 and for track is 3. So moving into this hex will cost 3 movement points, bringing these down to 5. To get there, we're at 4, 3, so that then gives 3 remaining from here, so we could do another advance. I'd really like to try to put pressure on this road and to express a zone of control over this particular hex, as that would then forfeit the Axis player from being able to use the road for supply calculations or movement calculations, unless they put a offsetting force there that negates our zone of control. So that's kind of my focus. And if we put a unit here, that would exert a zone of control on this hex. It's also a great way for the Axis to reduce their movement point costs trying to cross that river by using the road. So given that, I think we will take our motorized unit here. We'll build this little bit of a chain that starts to cut off and forces these units now to have to fight their way out. And then we're going to use the 6-guard tank formation to represent the remaining 3 units of tracked armor that we're bringing up. Now, I just realized we have a bit of a dilemma to make, actually. So we could also move here, putting pressure on this formation, and that prevents us from having to go into the woods, which does have a higher movement cost for us. So going from here, we're just going to count this out one more time. We've got 1, 2, 3, and then 3 to move into the woods is 6. And that's pretty much where we'd have to end, as everywhere else we're moving into more woods, other than this hex, of course. I think we're going to move the 6-guard tank formation up here into these light woods. And then we're going to take these units, and again, we're going to put them off camera just to try to reduce that counter density as much as we can. This, of course, now leaves a hole in the line that we want to try to fill, so we do not present the Axis with an opportunity to plug it, cut off our supply to these units, etc. So what we're going to do is look in these hexes to see, can we steal some of these leg infantry, these infantry divisions to move there. Now, I should have looked at these stacks a little earlier. This is a pretty weak hex if we take the 218th Infantry Division and move it up, especially considering the 218th already has 1 step loss on it. Let's see what we have over here at the 211th. So this does have a step loss. And then we have the 155th below it. I think we'll take the 211th and we'll move them up into this hex, which then gives us an effective chain of control all the way through. Again, we probably could have left a space or two in between, but that then gives us issues with zone of control that the enemy would project, then cutting off our trace supply. And I think we're going to be able to make trace supply just fine, as we do have a source of supply in trainable hex situations along this railroad. There is actually a road, or trail, excuse me, track, that's the term. A track that does actually cross the river here, so that helps with the movement. So I think we're still going to be just fine from a trace supply perspective, but of course we'll calculate that when we get to the supply segment, and I will hope I did not make any grievous errors. So that accounts for this breakthrough that we had, which we did leverage one of our two supply points that were kind of dedicated to the central portion of the front. Now, when we look a little bit further north, we do see that we have this gap between us and the Axis forces, as the Axis forces actually in turn one started to pull back to try to have a shorter line that they had to defend. They actually began the scenario stretching kind of on a in contact perimeter with the Soviet forces here. So I think the natural conclusion then for us would be that we should take these forces that we have as the Soviets and try to reestablish that line, and then to look for areas of potential breakout. We'll begin by taking the 240th Infantry Division and moving that up here into these light woods. Now, this particular armor unit, we don't have currently paid for fuel, so it is unable to make that move at this time. And I don't think we're going to expend any supply points just to move that one unit. It's not quite as important to us. Over here, we have the 8th Infantry Division, which looks like has a step loss underneath it. And we're going to move that 1-2 up here to this hex along this road. And dry conditions, we're still just fine there. We have the 148th Infantry Division, and I think we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to move that up. I want to have a concentration of the forces here on this road, as that's the point that's going to be easiest for us to advance against and cross this river if we so choose to. We do open ourselves a little bit to a possible counterattack here. Now, when we go over on this side, we're going to take, what do we got under here? Yeah, another infantry division. I'm going to take these two guys, and we're going to go 1-2. We're going to move them up here. Now that then leaves us with this stack of units that I'm actually going to repurpose, and instead of putting them back on the contact line of defense here with the Axis, with these two, we're going to start shifting them up. Before we do that, though, as this is now starting to enter into the northern portion of our combat sector, I'm going to pause, reorient the camera just a little, and we'll continue on from there with movements in the northern sector of the front. All right, so now that we're looking at our northern sector of the line, we're actually going to now talk a little bit about what happened last turn. In the previous turn, the Soviets actually managed to break through right here in this hex, and then they advanced quite aggressively along this road, which you can see under the counters here, towards the town, city, village, I can't quite remember what its classification is, I believe minor city, of Zitomir, which is where this stack and formation of Axis units are. They got very near to the border of the city, but frankly ran out of movement allowance with their forward units here under this DG counter, where we actually see the 4th Guard Tank Army had led this particular breakthrough. So we're going to be a little disadvantaged because the Axis did manage to DG this particular stack towards the end of their turn, which carries through now for us. And it's going to make then any frontal assault very difficult. It really did kind of accomplish its objective, though, of forcing the Axis to really redeploy a lot of its forces just to try to prevent this from being a complete breakout, where you see they've brought up these security forces. There were some other forces that were kind of garrisons in other towns and villages further behind the lines here. So if we did manage to break through here, the Axis would be in quite a difficult situation to actually prevent us from getting to Vinnytsia, which is one of the two opportunities that the Soviets have to win the scenario. They can take Vinnytsia, which follows this road here going south of Zhytomyr, just about 10 hexes behind that, or of course, as we mentioned earlier in the video, on the south side of the lines, Uman is the other opportunity. So these two axes of advance are really where the Soviets will have the most success, I believe. We did reinforce here with actually a hedgehog during our replenishment supply phase at the beginning of this turn, because the Axis forces had built up a concentration of units here and actually were very dangerously close to actually cutting us off from this breakthrough, which would have been quite bad. And they were just a couple of values off in their die roll from doing so. The Soviets actually lost one of two units that they had here. And now you see we just have this one armor unit of 4 combat values sitting in this hedgehog. So the name of the situation here is let's kind of reinforce the positions to make sure that we can maintain this little pocket that we've created. But then secondly, because of this movement of the Axis forces, they've left a number of points in their defensive lines maybe a little bit more vulnerable than they would like. So we'll try to capitalize on those, of course. When we look over here, this is actually where most of our supply points have been provisioned for the northern offensive. We have 3 supply points here in this hex, and we have a supply point and a half here in this hex, 2 tokens, that are ready to put either formations into supply or to supply for combat operations. Now, we haven't actually seen any overruns in the movement phase in this recording as of yet, but I think we will have the opportunity to in this segment of the recording. So when we're looking at the kind of Axis front line here, we do see that this may be a particular weak area. Given the fog of war rules that OCS does have, we're not able to look beyond the top unit in the stack, unless that top unit is some type of formation marker or something, then the player is allowed to see the unit below that. So really the alert 2-2 might be a little bit of a feint by the Axis player, where they could have a rather strong unit underneath it. But what we do know for certain is that attacking here in this hex, we would be up against an action rating 4 unit with mechanized armor in an open terrain, which would make it difficult for us. And then down here even, we do have an action rating of 3, and that could also pose some challenges for us. Rather, I think the opportunity would be to counterattack here against this alert unit. Now, when we look, we do see that we have these infantry units here, and my kind of intended role for them is that if we're successful in the 25th tank formation conducting an overrun, that we would then be able to reinforce this hex with these infantry units by doing a little bit of this shimmy or leapfrogging of units up to replace that hex. So that's one great possibility. But then it brings into question how we're going to balance the reinforcement of our breakthrough, because the 25th tank formation is also the primary unit that we have at our disposal to try to prevent a breakout, or excuse me, try to prevent our breakout from being cut off or encircled. So what I think we may actually do is just a little bit off camera, 2 hexes down here, we have the 5th Guards Tank Army, and I'm going to bring it up here. This formation marker, again, of course, is representing other units that we have off map. So let's bring the 5th Guard Tank unit up here onto the board so you can see what it's composed of. So we're going to toss these counters here. this artillery unit. We have a motorized infantry unit. Their infantry unit. Let's see what else we've got. Some armor, supply truck, some more armor available here too. So that's a pretty reasonable force that we could maybe use and try to get up towards the front and reinforce these positions. So let's begin by moving some of these units into their movement state, or mode, excuse me. That will give us the opportunity to get up to the front line and reinforce a little bit. So I think these will also put into the movement mode. We're going to see though if we can't keep these two armor units in their combat mode, and if 8 points is going to be enough. So we're actually moving again just 2 hexes below here. Sorry, it's out of camera. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. No, actually, I think we'd want to continue here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We're following a kind of major road here, so that helped, or just a road it's called. So that helps a little bit with the calculations. 6, 7, 8. So this is where we'd have to leave the armor, which I'd rather not do. So what value do we get out of these if we flip them to a movement mode? They go down to 4 combat, but 16 movement. So that gets us to 8. And then we'd be at, yeah, please ignore me. We're going to flip these back to combat mode. I don't know what I'm doing here. When we actually get onto that road, we actually get half movement value, so forgive me. We get to 1, 2, 3. Now we're onto the road, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5, 6. And I think this hex is where we leave the road. So let's move these guys here. Yeah, so this would be 7, and that would be 8. So we can do a pretty decent job of reinforcing with the 5th Guard Tanks Army. So let's then pay for this unit to be fueled. So we're going to take a supply point down here. So we'll flip this 3 over to a 2. I'm going to put the 5th Guard Tanks Army again back off map in their current mode configuration, because it's very important that we maintain that so as not to find ourselves using the wrong modes than what we've actually selected during the movement phase. So those are now off camera again. So the 5th Guard Tank Army is really kind of effectively plugged this hole right here for us. And I think what that frees us to do, and I'm going to take these units here, and I think it may be best if we actually just start using the formation marker to try to help a little bit there. There's actually not that much firepower with these guys. Really, all we've got is this 1 AG unit here. So that's not great. However, I think what we can probably do... Well, we're going to fuel the formation because we want to try to reposition them, and we'll also be trying to conduct an overrun. So we're going to lose another supply point here, which then puts us to 1 supply point. So our total available supply points, which is going to be important to remember, we're now at 2.5. So we're starting to get a little lower on supply. But we've got the 25th tank now fueled and ready to go. I'm going to take these units off map. And I think we will move them up here to this hedgehog unit, again to try to prevent them from breaking through. And it's important to remember the Axis player is not going to know exactly what is in that formation. Now, of course, I'm playing solitaire, and the best way that I can possibly simulate the Axis player not knowing what's in that formation is I like to take a little bit of time between turns, so I genuinely do forget what is underneath each of these stacks. So for all the Axis player will know, there may be some significant armor as part of that formation that's sitting there in that hex, which should be enough of a deterrent to prevent them trying to break through there again. I'm actually pretty satisfied with what we've got in this hex. So you see we have this infantry unit, a mortar, but then underneath there we've got this armor unit, which is actually part of the 25th tank, that really is the linchpin, and that armor unit is what would really make it difficult for the Axis to have a successful counterattack in that hex. And then if we look a little further up here, we see we have these 2 armor units of the 4th Guard tank, which is quite substantial. And then we have the remaining units of the 4th Guard tank formation up here next to the city, which does have one of those armor units in it as well. So they're pretty well off. They are DG'd, but we'll be able to clear that marker when we get to the end of our turn, so that way we don't have to worry about it from a counterattack perspective when it gets to be the Axis player's turn here in turn 2. So now that we've reinforced the line a little bit, I think we can then take these units and let's see what we've got here. So we've got that armor unit, infantry, and then the motorized infantry there as well. We can now think about maybe using these to conduct an overrun. Now, it would cost the 3 movement points to conduct the overrun, which all of these have available, and we'd be looking at about 16 combat value, and we would have bonuses as well for the mechanized unit that we have. Given that it's open terrain, it would be a 2x multiplier, so it might actually be 14. If they have a unit with heavy anti-tank effects, that would then reduce that multiplier a little bit, which we'd have to take into account for. But regardless, it's going to be more than just 7, even if we are facing enemy armor in that hex. We do know they have a combat value of 2, but what we don't know is what's underneath that hex. In the movement phase, by conducting an overrun, we do get the added bonus of a slightly better roll for surprise. Instead of having to roll a 11, we only have to roll a 10. So that may be a benefit to us as well. Now, our action rating, we only have a 3, which isn't great, but I think it should suffice. So even if they have a 4 action rating unit here, which would be a little surprising, it puts us in a position at the very least that at worst case we're facing a -1 DRM, which I wouldn't be too concerned about, especially if we get favorable odds. I think we're going to try this account for no other reason than we need to make sure we have some action during this recording. So what I actually have, and I'm afraid this is going to stay off camera, I've made a little cheat sheet for myself when conducting battles that I like to write down all the values, because although when we look at the charts and tables that OCS provides, and let's see if this focuses, oh no, I just knocked over some units I'm going to have to correct there. But when we look at the charts and tables that OCS provides, it gives great detail into what we need to go through for each combat segment, and that's specifically going to be in the middle portion of the pamphlet where it gives the combat sequence summary, which again we'll see if the camera will focus in on that, kind of a step-by-step understanding of what you need to do to conduct a combat operation. So the first thing that I'm just going to note is which hex is attacking which hex. So here we're looking at 5228 is going to be attacking 5227 in terms of hexes. This is an overrun operation as opposed to being conducted during the normal combat segment. And in terms of supply cost, our supply cost is going to be 3 tokens. So let's go ahead and make sure we pay for that. And I'm going to take it again from this same hex. We're going to take this 1 supply unit, going to trade that in, and we're going to get back a 1T, or 1 token. So that then pays for our supply. And this is the very intriguing thing now about OCS, of course, is that it forces the defender the choice of, are they going to actually use some of their own supply to defend the operation. Now that I'm actually committed to it, what we're going to do is we're going to look as well at what's underneath here. Oh my goodness, yes. So there was another unit there. It's not necessarily a high combat value, but it is a very high action rating of 5, which is going to, it's really going to help the defender. And now that I'm sitting here in the defender's shoes, I think what we are going to do is pay for supply. Now, the next question is, I don't know if I've actually got supply, and forgive me, I just need to really quickly correct what had happened here, and I'll use actually the camera footage to make sure I get all of this right, but I think I remember it well enough. We're going to see if there's any supply that's actually available here. Now this unit formation actually should not be saying that the formation's in supply, because they would have lost that in their last turn. So we're actually going to take that off. Now we did have the 6-guard tank army here, and this unit was here. This is the live demonstration of how difficult sometimes these OCS counter stacks can be to manage. Now we don't actually have any supply in this stack. Now we could see if we have supply up here in Zitomir, but I'm not certain that we do. Let's see. So that's actually a step loss marker. Yeah, I'm not seeing any supply there. Nor here. So there's not actually, what I can see at least, any supply that is available for these units to draw from. And what we're going to do in that case is we're going to have them eat off the map. Excuse me, not eat off the map. We're going to have them use their own internal supplies, which we will mark accordingly. So let me just mark that, and I'll make sure that I get that on the map. Now what we're going to do is look at what we're using for our attack unit, kind of the lead attack unit, if you will, and this is what determines which unit's AR we're going to take. Considering that all 3 units have the same action rating, I'm actually going to take the unit that is kind of weakest here, so that way it's less of a hit if we do lose them, and that's going to be this 41st unit here. So I'm just going to notate that. And the value is 3 for action rating. The defender, we're going to leverage this armor unit that they have that's also giving them heavy anti-tank effects, which is going to be pretty substantial. And that would be the 3rd 509th Tiger Company, I think it is. 3rd 509th Tiger, which is an action rating of 5. And this is actually something that, from a historical perspective, the Axis did with decent success, we'd say, where they stopped using their traditional formations and would, say, have these specialty Tiger units, placed quite tactically well along the front lines to fill in holes, counterattack, etc. Now, the defender gets to choose what type of terrain the attacker will have, what type of hex features they're going to use. So if this was a city or a village or something like that, they'd be able to use that. So we're going to say that it's open for both, as there's no other terrain features that can be used. The defender does have heavy anti-tank, and the attacker has heavy anti-tank, which means we're going to multiply then our mechanized value by 1.5. So this is now going to turn into a 10.5, round it to an 11. And the terrain category, so this is where you put in open, close, very close, etc. on the combat results table. We are in an open terrain category. And our attacker combat value had 11, 14, and 20. And the defender combat value is sitting at a 5. Well, no, excuse me, that's not right, because we need to take the armor value there times 2, so that actually gets us to 8 for the defender value. This then gives us an odds column of, it's going to be 2 to 1 it looks like, which is not great. And the attacker DRM is actually -2. So this is not going to be, I think, quite as successful as we had initially hoped. Now what I'm going to do here is actually roll 3 dice of 2 different colors to try to identify whether or not there's going to be surprise. And forgive me, I think earlier I said rolls of 10 and 11. Values are actually 9 or 10. Now in this case, there's a decent chance that the defender will actually get surprise, which would be quite thematic, as I was rather surprised to find that there was that Tiger armor unit sitting on the bottom of that stack. So this is an overrun attack, so normally it's a value of 9 or more, the attacker gains surprise. If the defender has a 6 or less, they gain surprise. Considering that we have a DRM of -2, those values actually shift to the attacker needing an 11 and the defender needing an 8 for surprise. So more than a 50% chance here that the defender is going to get surprise. So like I said, we're going to roll 3 dice. The 2 in blue will represent the surprise roll, and then the red die will represent how many shifts on the combat resolution table we're going to adjust results, whether the attacker or defender has surprise. So let's go ahead and make that roll. We see that we have a 10 and a 5. No one gets surprise, which as the attacker is actually, oh, forgive me. Yes, no one gets surprise, which is probably a good thing for the attacker because things were looking a little grim for them. Let's now hop on over to the combat resolution table. We have a no surprise situation, so a modified odds column is still 2 to 1. And we're going to roll 2 die here to see what we have for resolution. So that is a value of 11, which is great for the attacker, but it is actually a 9 as a result of the DRM. When we're looking at the table, a 2 to 1 odds in open and a value of 9 is attacker option 1 and defender option 1. So that's not great, because if I, as the attacker now, do actually lose a step to force the defender to then either retreat or lose a step, it means we're not going to take the hex because the defender has more than 1 unit in there. However, the defender is going to have to take that option with the Tiger unit. So I think as the attacker, we're going to go ahead and we're going to say that we're taking the loss and losing the 41st unit there. So we're now going to put that unit into the dead pile for the Soviets. And now the Axis player has to decide whether or not they want to lose the Tiger unit or retreat 1 hex. Because the Soviets can't actually advance into the hex that they would be vacating, and I really don't want to lose that Tiger unit as the Axis player, I'm actually going to take the retreat option, and we're actually going to pull back 1 hex there. So what this leaves us with is the Soviets do not get a chance to advance, with these particular units at least, but we do force the Axis player to retreat out of the hex as they don't want to lose that Tiger unit. Now what the Axis player maybe didn't see coming, although we're playing solitaire, so maybe he did, so we're going to do a little bit of a shuffle here, and we're going to take this infantry unit and its accompanying anti-tank unit, I believe that is underneath, and we're going to move these guys into the hex that the Axis player has vacated. And we're now going to take, as a Soviet player, and fill in that hole with that unit, and this unit's going to go up here to strengthen that little point of contact just even more so. Now, we're not going to have probably enough supply or even units to further this breakout here, but we were able to reinforce it. And again, further to the north, we're not actually going to do anything given the defensive situation that the Axis player finds themselves in. So we're going to call it here for this particular recording, and we'll see you next time as we look at further stages of turn 2, and I might do a little bit of cleanup and stuff, but excited to bring you guys along for this and to try out some new video content. Thank you, as always, so much for watching. This is First Contact Gamer, signing off. Bye.